joining me in studio this morning, Texas State Senator Charles Perry. Welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm good, man. It's been a short tenure this time. I hadn't been here in a while, and then I'm back regular for a couple of times.
I know it. I appreciate you coming in.
We've got a feeder source, between the court systems and just the craziness in politics. It keeps somebody in the front.
Yeah, absolutely. I get before we get into the voter ID stuff and the 2017 legislative session. Last night, obviously, you've been watching, just most Republicans have been watching the Republican convention. What did you think about the speech by Ted Cruz yesterday?
Painful. I thought the speech itself, the content was probably pretty good. Disappointed, and it was just painful. It was not what I would consider what we needed at a convention. And it's time to unify. We cannot tolerate 4 more years of what we've had. Mm-hmm. We cannot tolerate the prospects of 3 Supreme Court justices being filled, as politicized as those positions have become. And he had an opportunity tonight, in my opinion, to unify, probably more than anyone in that convention, bringing people together. And I think he missed that opportunity, and just perfectly phrased, it was painful. And that was my observation, and I don't know whether I'm a lone wolf or not on that. And I understand people get their feelings hurt, but sometimes you got to be a gracious loser, acknowledge that you fought a fight, you lost the battle, but the war is bigger than any one individual. And looked a lot like me last night. Inner me, look at me.
Yeah.
Instead of let's look at the bigger picture and what's really at stake. And I'm disappointed.
I think the first 18 minutes, I think that's about right. 18, 19 minutes of the speech, pretty good, talking about conservative value. Yeah. I mean, these are things that everyone in that hall needs to embrace. And then afterwards, when the boos started coming down, I think when you looked at and I don't know if you saw Rubio's video or not, Marco Rubio and obviously Donald Trump don't get along. They're not best friends. I don't even think there's been an endorsement from Marco Rubio. But what Rubio laid out is, here is what Donald Trump's better at. And I thought that did more of a service maybe than what Cruz did.
Yeah, and I would say it this way. I was very encouraged by Pence.
Yes.
The highlight to me was, who is this guy? What's he stand for? What's he about?
Yeah.
Somebody said he needed to be a little high energy. I said, at my age, man, the energy is not an issue. You just do who you are. I saw a very confident, very comfortable guy, and that was an encouraging outcome. It was just sad that it had an overshadow. Prior to coming up. But
that's who I feel bad for, is Mike Pence.
But I think he did a good job. I'm excited. I'm thinking he brought more on board last night than we may have divided on the other side.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's going to be interesting to watch tonight as Donald Trump takes the stage and see what he has to say.
I tell you who's been impressive. His kids.
His kids have been awesome.
Kids have been impressive. And so, you can kind of look to the source of that impressiveness, if there is such a word, and gives me some confidence that Trump's got a different side than what people have given him credit for.
Yeah. Visiting with Texas State Senator Charles Perry in studio. Let's talk about yesterday, the Fifth Circuit striking down the voter ID law here in the state of Texas. Apparently, it is discriminatory, according to the court, to have to show your ID when going and voting.
Yeah, and I think you read in a lot of different things, as you always do. One, they didn't say that it was intentionally discriminatory, and I can tell you, being in that debate for 2 sessions, really, continuing to have that debate, we never intentionally do anything to disenfranchise voters. On the contrary, the intent of that voter bill was to ensure the integrity of the box, which give those people that go to vote the confidence that their vote counts. Mm-hmm. And so that's the intent. We're not shocked that the ruling came out that way. It was early symptoms of maybe the cost side of that. We provided a free ID, but we didn't provide the dollars to get to the free ID. So as an example, if someone was required to go get a birth certificate and it cost $5, then that cost was not being provided for. So those had came out real early on after the passage of that bill. So we knew there was going to be some challenges along the way. We're going to go back and figure out what the objections were, get that cleaned up, and reprocess the bill. And that's the other thing. I think we didn't get told it'll never happen. We got told, here's some concerns, go fix them. And that was even signaled prior to last session, and we didn't act on it. And I'm a little disappointed there was discussion to act on it. But the other side of that is until we kind of see what they're going to say, why act on it? Well, in hindsight, it's always 2020. And I think there was a momentum to want to act on some of those concerns, the cost of obtaining and some of those things. And now I think we'll go back and clean that up and get right back in the saddle.
So do you think in 2017 and during the legislative session, voter ID
Absolutely.
will be one of the top bills?
I would be shocked if it's not one of the first we get done. And we're going to know clearly what the objections are. You know, they complain about the short list of acceptable IDs. And we'll look at that. You know, if a state university ID is what makes it work, then we'll just make sure the process of obtaining a state university ID secures citizenship status. Because I don't know that it does right now. That was the argument. You ought to be able to use a Texas Tech ID. Well, I don't know that there's I don't know what that process is to get the ID, but I don't think it has citizenship status. So if that's what we got to do, then we'll back in the process of becoming eligible to have one of those IDs so that we are secure that citizens are the ones that are going to the voting booth. So we'll clean those up. Whatever they are, they'll be small, honestly. I think that we're fine where we're sitting today. We probably could have done a couple of things a little different. Some states have the same requirement and have been held constitutional. So we'll look at those and see where we're at and clean it up and get it going. I don't know that November is a possibility. That kind of sits in the AG. If the AG asks for a Supreme Court ruling, the odds are it's going to be a split at the current makeup, so it's going to throw it right back down in the lower court. So I don't know if we're going to invest those. So I don't know if we get this fixed before November, barring a special session by a governor to call in and get it done. And then you'd have to have the ruling by the panel out of, and it probably wouldn't happen. But so, and I don't think it changed the voter patterns for Lubbock, Texas.
Yeah.
How many times have you gone to the poll for the last 20 years and provided a license without being asked?
Right.
So I don't know that it impacts us out here that much. It's just common sense. Most people get it, and that's the disappointment.
Yeah, well, and you bring up the college ID, and I could see this being a big fight among the colleges because if you're going to, and when I say you, I mean the legislature, if you are going to write up a law that says, okay, you have to be a citizen in order to get a college ID, well, then we talk about in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. We already know that they're illegal immigrants, and they do have student IDs because over at Texas Tech, as a former student, all you got to do is go up and get an ID. That's it.
It becomes a problem. And it's those issues we chose not to go down because we allowed for a driver's license, a passport, a CHL. We allowed, which is a very extensive background check. Mm-hmm. So all of that information is already being obtained through multiple government-issued IDs that we know the eligibility process to obtain it secures citizenship status or identifies citizenship status. And if we're going to have to expand that list, we're just going to have to make sure that process of obtaining those IDs gets us to where our intent is.
Can you hang around one more segment?
Yeah.
Great. When we come back, we'll continue our visit with Senator Charles Perry here on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 790 KFYO. Back on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 790 KFYO, Texas State Senator Charles Perry in studio with me this morning. We've talked a little bit about voter ID. It will be coming up in the next legislative session. Senator Perry, you were saying that you think it'll be solved. That legislature will come up with a new version that will hopefully appease the courts because this is something that other states have voter ID. And in Texas, this is not new for Texas. In fact, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of voter ID before. So you just kind of have to fix a few things.
Right. Whatever their objections were, we'll take them to heart, and we'll go in and make sure that the intent of voter integrity is not sacrificed, not diminished, and tweak it. It's been done in other states, and I think that's the thing people ought to take confidence in. This is not new. This was something that other states had held muster on when it's challenged, and we just need to go back and make sure ours looks as much like those that have had, not sacrificing the integrity.
Let's get into something else that will come up, I think, during the next legislative session. Governor Abbott, I think it was last week, announcing some legislation that he would like to see passed that would make it a hate crime if you attacked a police officer. There's been some blowback, from Republicans and Democrats on it, saying that it goes a little too far in the same way that I guess Senator Cornyn put out a similar piece of legislation, and that received some blowback. What are your thoughts as far as the attack on a police officer being a hate crime.
Yeah, and I'm gonna beg off on this deal. I guess it's a technicality issue, and I don't know the heart of what was behind that initiative. But the way I would guess stretch it is it's already a capital punishment crime. But if you're an officer off duty and not in uniform, where it's obvious that you're an officer, then possibly is that where that law is going? I don't know. I have not had those discussions with the governor's office. I hate to comment, but I don't know that you gained anything by making, because it's already a capital punishment crime. But I don't know where that drive was. Why do you make this an exception out here for a hate crime, or add that to the hate crimes list if it's already a punishment by capital punishment? But maybe it is the off uniform. Maybe because that's what we had happen in, I believe, Baton Rouge. One of those was an off-duty officer. It's obviously when you show up at the scene and then you become that officer's role, it would be clear to that individual that. So I don't know. I mean, as far as personally goes, since it's already a capital punishment offense, do we gain anything, or do we create more angst between the officers? Do we separate them one more level where people believe that they're, quote, different than us? I want to be careful with that, but I'm going to be supportive, probably, if anything, that Governor Abbott wants to do that, if I can understand the background and where that gets us to. Does that move us to a more protective level over a guys in blue? Then I'm probably going to be pretty supportive of it. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to, in good intent, put them in a level where it gives them more protection, but at the same time creates an environment that's even more animus towards that guy in blue. So if there's a perception they've got a better deal or a different set, that's something I think we consider. But I haven't researched what his thoughts were behind that, so to say yes or no or up or down.
Sure.
But I guess it comes down to that guy that was off duty. I would assume that's where the hate crime designation gets you over into that category.
Visiting with Texas State Senator Charles Perry. Speaking of Baton Rouge and what we've seen in Baton Rouge and Dallas and in other places here in the United States with officers being targeted, I thought the sheriff in Baton Rouge had a really good comment when he said this isn't about gun control, this is about what's in a man's heart. Mm-hmm. And that's a line I think that should be everywhere. And I'm pretty sure that's something you would agree with. The mayor here in Lubbock announcing that maybe next month they're going to have some different town halls to talk to the community and to get feedback. What do you think this boils down to? This, citizen versus police officer, the war on police. What does this boil down to?
Well, it boils down, if you want to go to a spiritual level, it is the heart issue. And I've said it. We're not going to make a law, one, that's going to change a person's heart. It starts on an individual level relationship, and we got to change those hearts. But I applaud any and effort that extends communication, the opportunity to communicate. I see community policing where you see that guy in blue in that community every day. And youngsters, it's a young person's deal. So when kids start seeing officers in their community every day and they get a relationship, it's a relationship. So any measure or any metric by any city or any community to extend the communication lines, to build relationships and trust, and to eliminate the myths and the perceptions that exist out there about who's bad, stereotypes on both sides. And we start breaking those down and acknowledge there's always going to be that bad actor on both sides of this equation, and we deal with them equally and fairly and quickly, then I think you'll start turning that tide. But it takes time invested in people, and I think that's a witness that we've had for 3,000 years plus now with Christ. I think it's so funny. We get off on a tangent, but the answer is pretty clear. You just build relations with people, and you take government out of the equation for filling some of those voids that we've allowed them to do it. But on this level, people just need to have that relationship and trust. And anything our local communities can do to extend the trust and the communication. It's a two-way street, though.
Right.
Our cops can do all the extensions of hands, and if there's not a willingness to accept or participate in those discussions, it falls short. Mm-hmm. But we've got to make the effort to get into the communities and understand their perceptions and understand their plights. And there are real differences on some level that we've got to acknowledge. But there's nothing that we can't work out if we're willing to sit down and talk. So I applaud the mayor for that. I applaud Stevens for the community policing action that's going to be. That's a pretty cool deal to know that Joe's been in my neighborhood for 10 years and the kids have grown up with Joe. So there's no consternation between those two, that They understand that they're all pulling the cart in the same direction. Good measures.
Yeah. Let me go back to the next legislative session and the courts, because you have the abortion law that the legislature is going to have to go back to. Now you have the voter ID law that the legislature is going to have to go back to. Educational, funding is probably going to be an issue in the next legislative session. And, you have that budget that you have to deal with as well. Is there enough time to get to everything and the real pressing issues? Because that's something you're going to hear from the left and probably some members on the right of, we've got bigger issues than voter ID. We've got bigger issues and we have limited time.
Well, we don't have limited time, I guess, to do the important business. So what I'm saying by that, number one, we have a pretty wide bandwidth. I was waste facilities in San Antonio and Austin yesterday working on water issues. I've dealt with CPS between yesterday and today. So the bandwidth is big. And so, but if we come up on 140th day and look around in the important issues of the day, life, budget, education, whatever that may not be done, we get to go to special session. So now, do we want to anticipate that? No. Do I want to be there? Do I want to be there in August? But there's this perception that we've got this finite amount of time to get all the big stuff done, and that if we run out of time, then we leave. Well, depending on the matter at hand, and Rick Perry proved this, we'll stay over 2 special sessions if we need to get an abortion bill done.
Right.
So we got the time we need to do the big things. The budget will be the number one, and our budget's going to be a little tighter, but at the same time, it's not a devastating budget. It's going to be an okay session on the budget. There'll be some tightening of the belt, but a lot of that happens through process and attrition. So we're not going to have to make these draconian type cuts like 11 did. So we'll be okay on the budget side. The voter ID, hopefully between now and December, we'll have the fixed. All we'll have to do is file it. It'll go back through the court systems. It'll get challenged. And I think if we fix it to one that's already been, then, hey, we're there. So on the school funding, adequacy is not an issue. Equity, everybody likes to see something different. That's a challenge. We can't fix that in a session. It's not fixable. It's not fixable in a session. It's not fixable without a constitutional change, because it comes down to how you distribute. Well, it doesn't matter the funding, be it property tax, sales tax, or whatever kind of fee. The distribution of those funds is going to require some pretty in-depth discussion, and we'll have debate on what that might look like. But you can't fix that in a year's time. You're talking about completely wholesaling out how we give money out in the school districts. I throw that in with vouchers or school choice. You throw that in with
you've got the
Constitutional 5. And then I think the biggest item we're going to have to deal with, or we will deal with on a very public level, will be the CPS foster care system. Yeah. It's going to be the education and the water and all that funding. And then talk about water. I mean, I could go on for days on some of the water initiatives that we're going to be working on. So it's going to be busy, but the idea that we quit at 140 days if we're done or not, it's not true. I mean, we'll get through it. But voter ID will be done early. I think you'll have the Constitutional 5 convention that just Governor Abbott's legacy piece.
Right.
That'll take some time, but it's going to be good.
All right. State Senator Charles Perry, as always, we appreciate you coming in today.
Don't want to be anywhere but Texas.
All right.
We'll see you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.